I will introduce myself again, Elizabeth. I am one of the support staff for the Hawaii Invasive Species Council. I'm based on Maui, and I'm also one of the people who helps coordinate the online pest hotline 643pest.org. I'm going to hand it over to Arisa and then tell you a little bit about what we'll be presenting today, and then we'll dive in.
Okay, yeah, thanks, Elizabeth. So my name is Arisa Barcinas. I'm with the Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle Response. I'm the Outreach Associate. So Elizabeth, go ahead and take it away with that intro and then.
Okay, so I just wanted to give you an idea of what we'll be covering today. So we will be talking about the Hawaii statewide Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle Communications Plan and give you some other brief updates on the current status of CRB and some of the common questions that we've been getting during this whole process. One little note, that is a mouthful, you might have noticed. So we will be saying CRB probably throughout the entirety instead of Coconut Rhinoceros Beetle. But as we jump in, Arisa will start off talking about giving us a brief update on the status of CRB, the CRB situation in Hawaii right now. Then we will start talking about the CRB communications plan, the reason it was created, who contributed the sections of the communications plan. Then we will talk about some of the priority stakeholders that we identified, the messaging for those groups. We'll talk a little bit about some of the common CRB questions that we hear throughout the state. And then we have some asks of you, the audience, to help contribute to this effort. And then hopefully we'll have time to be able to talk about some of your common community CRB or your personal CRB questions. So with that, I'll hand it over to Arisa to let us know what the current situation for CRB is right now.
Okay, thank you. So CRB in Hawaii, the coconut rhinoceros beetle was first detected in Hawaii on Oahu back in December of 2013. For about 10 years, it was contained to Oahu until just last year when we got the first detections on Kauai, Maui, and Hawaii Island. Okay, so here we have an invasion curve depicting where each island is in its response to CRB. So this invasion curve provides a more structured framework for addressing invasive species. So where each island is on this curve will depend on a few factors, and response activities will vary in each of these phases. So prevention is going to serve as the initial line of defense. So this is where Lanai and Molokai are, since they have not had any CRB detections. I just want to note that on this graph, we have all of Maui County grouped together there, but Lanai and Molokai are separate and in this prevention stage. And then once CRB is detected, then we shift into eradication efforts. So this is where Maui and Big Island currently are. So activities for eradication are going to include mostly early detection and rapid response mechanisms. So things such as delimiting surveys and local quarantines. So eradication activities are more likely to succeed when populations are small and localized, like we see in Maui and Big Island. Okay, and then once we see a more rapid increase in population and spread of CRB, eradication becomes less likely and there's a shift into containment. So containment strategies are going to include things like delimiting surveys, treatments, and activities for restricting population expansion. So this is where Kauai is currently in. And then finally, as infestations grow, we shift into more long-term control and management. So this is the stage that Oahu is in, and these activities are going to include reducing populations at ports and creating quarantines to limit the risk of spread from this infested area. And then one really important thing is that outreach at all of these stages is really critical, which is why we've created the comms doc as a guide for communication about CRB at a statewide level. So I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Elizabeth to give an overview and more on the goal of the document.
Mahalo, Arisa. So as CRB started to spread across the state outside of Oahu, and more partner organizations became involved in all of those different aspects that she was talking about, with early detection surveys, mitigation efforts, control efforts, fielding reports and ID, as well as those critical outreach efforts, we decided to take a cue from a successful approach taken when rapid ohia death started to spread in our state. Now, rapid ohia death, which we also call ROD because it's easier, when ROD is similar to CRB in many ways, in that each island in our state has a different situation with levels of infestation and multiple different partners involved in management. So Deal and Arm Partners, when working on ROD, created a statewide rapid response plan and a communications plan to answer questions and provide guidance on priorities for ROD for all the islands. So we decided to take a similar approach for the coconut rhinoceros beetle. And we wanted to create a guide for all of our different partners, educators, community organizers to be able to have the essential information, so that critical knowledge about CRB identification, prevention, and management. And we actually gathered a hui of folks that met for over 6 months, I believe, nearly weekly, to start working on this communications plan. And of notable contribution were the Island Invasive Species Committees, CRB Response, CGAPS, the Coordinating Group on Alien Pest Species, Hawaii Invasive Species Council, and CTAHR, HDOA, and USDA contributed also. So during that time of meeting for 6 months, we had folks involved regularly representing almost every single island in the state. And this was really important because each of these islands have unique island-specific challenges, terrains, community needs, and their own questions on how to address communications about CRB and deal with their community. So with that contribution from throughout the state, as well as the expertise from Oahu, from CRB Response and others, we were able to create customized content for diverse audiences and stakeholders across the islands, ensuring that it was relevant to every island situation. And we can provide a link. So there's a QR code here. The actual communications plan is on the HISC website. We can give you a link in the chat and also provide it again at the end of the presentation. Okay, now Arisa is going to talk a little bit about how we address this issue of these differing levels of infestation and the different needs that those differing levels of infestation warrant across the state.
Thank you. And I included the link to the comms document in the chat also, if anyone wanted to take a look at that. So in this guide, we split up messaging into action items for infested versus non-infested islands. So in this plan, an infested island is where CRB populations are established and activities are focused more on management and mitigation of populations and damage. And then for non-infested islands, that would be where CRB populations are not yet established or are present at very low levels. For non-infested islands, management efforts are going to focus on prevention, early detection, and rapid response. So when an island is still considered non-infested, accidental transport of CRB is going to be one of the biggest risks, which you'll see is something that we focus on in a lot of the messaging. So when going through the messaging, we would consider Oahu to be infested, an infested island, and then all the other islands to be non-infested. Okay, so here's an overview of what we have in this comms doc in addition to those specific messages. So first, we have some general information. So that includes identification information on CRB. We also have information on primary and secondary food sources for CRB. We have a guide on high-risk materials, so breeding material, and then also a guide for signs of CRB infestation, so things like tree damage or preferable environments. Okay, and then we also have some more management focused resources in here. So things like information on traps for early detection and monitoring. We also have information on community trapping programs that have been deployed on non-infested islands. And then we also have information on management techniques, so things like treatments that can be used. And then we also have procedures for collecting and reporting CRB. All right, and then lastly, at the end of the document, you're also going to see a bunch of resources that we've included there. So things from contact information to different groups doing CRB management. And then we also have things like video links that can be shared, as well as a CRB outreach toolkit, which includes handouts that can be passed out and presentations if you need any of that. And then we also have frequently asked questions. We have a list of research papers, and then we have a list of where different materials for CRB management can be sourced from.
Hello, Arisa, and you guys won't believe this. I literally just got a shipment of pheromones for CRB traps while we were giving the presentation at my door just now. Kind of ironic timing. But one of the sections for the CRB communications plan that we wanted to draw your attention to was it is a little bit longer than this, but a section about all of the different ways that CRB can impact us. So not only do we as communicators, educators, managers need to meet our communities and audiences at their values that are impacted by CRB, since CRB are primarily moved across our landscape by humans and require community-wide efforts to control, we really do need to share all of the different ways that CRB can impact us. So it is a lot more than just an individual landscape palm tree in our yard that becomes damaged, or perhaps palm trees that look raggedy at our golf course. It's way more than that. So let me point out a few of those reasons that we felt were important. So on the ecological side of things, Lolu, our Prochardia species found nowhere else in the world, are highly susceptible to CRB damage. 1 or 2 CRB can kill those trees. Whereas many of the other, a healthy coconut palm can handle a low to mid-level infestation for years even, but not the Lolu. So there is the imminent extinction possibility for many of our unique Lolu species. We also have increased coastal erosion, the potential for increased insecticide and pesticide uses as we mitigate and control these species. On the economic side of things, sometimes it's a little more obvious, but there is just the obvious cost of controlling and removing damaged and dying palms. Then this is really important, the increased operating costs for all kinds of businesses that will need to implement mitigation measures and change their operations to reduce their risks or prevent the spread of CRB. And it goes without saying that CRB can really hit all of our palm growers and nurseries really hard throughout the state. And as we've seen from the situation that's happened in some of our Pacific neighbors during storms, these hazard trees of dead and dying trees can really cause harms or damages to humans, to properties, and in storms, it can greatly increase the cost of cleaning up. On the cultural side of things, Niu is the coconut, it is the tree of life. So it is the source of so many different of the critical parts for, or the critical materials for weavers, for practitioners, from ipu ava to pa'u drums. There's all kinds of materials that we source from the coconut palm. Additionally, coconuts are a critical subsistence crop, not only for our backyard farmers, but it's just a subsistence crop to have on the landscape. So we lose that potential crop. It is a threat to our sacred individual trees and groves. And CRB control will impact overall our ability for sustainable practices such as organic farming and composting. So now we're going to share some of those priority stakeholders that we were talking about, some of the messaging that our collective group came up with as important for those groups. And Arisa will start us off.
Thank you. So within this document, we've identified, in addition to messaging for specific stakeholders, we've identified 4 steps that are more general to what everyone can do. So that includes inspection and reporting, managing high-risk materials, staying informed, and preventing the spread. So this slide shows the general guidance within each of these actions, but for each stakeholder group, which we'll see in the next few slides, we created more tailored and specific messaging within each of these key items. Okay, so here's a list of the key stakeholder groups that we've identified in this document. While this might not be a comprehensive and exhaustive list of every stakeholder and every group dealing with CRB, this was what we've identified, at least in this first draft. And so we'll talk a little bit about a couple of them today, and we'll show you how to reference these guides. So today we're going to be looking at landscape professionals, retailers, farmers, and cultural practitioners. So landscape professionals were identified as a key stakeholder group due to their frontline role in detecting CRB and preventing its spread. This group is often in close contact with both CRB feeding sites and with CRB breeding material. So this group can include things like groups like nurseries, arborists, tree trimmers, and landscapers. All right, perfect. So here we see the general layout of messaging for stakeholder groups. So this is what you'll see in the document. And each stakeholder group is divided into messages for infested islands on the left, and then uninfested or non-infested islands, which are on the right. So one thing you might notice throughout these messages is the difference in messaging for infested islands and non-infested islands in terms of inspection and reporting. So I just wanted to point out that on Oahu, reporting of CRB is no longer necessary. So throughout this document, you'll only see that reporting aspect found under the non-infested islands. So while there are some differences depending on if the area is infested or non-infested, there are also going to be actions and messages that apply to the entire stakeholder group. So no matter what island they're on. So for landscape professionals, for example, one uniform recommendation that we have is to transport green waste to a processing facility in a timely manner. Okay, and then next we're going to look at another stakeholder group just so we can take a look at that. Thank you. Okay, so farmers are another stakeholder group that we identified in this plan. So farmers are typically another group at the forefront of the CRB fight. So they can experience impacts from CRB that include crop loss, high control costs, infrastructure changes. This group is typically working with potential CRB material and have the opportunity to detect CRB early and are in a position to use integrated pest management strategies. So I'll take a look at some of the messaging within this stakeholder group. All right, perfect, thank you. So for this stakeholder group, one thing that we emphasized was messages and actions surrounding the use of things like compost and mulch, and the safest way to monitor and use the material. And that's uniform across both infested and uninfested islands. One thing that we included in infested islands that's unique is the recommendation for treatment. So guidance on treating any infested material, while on non-infested islands, we push more of that reporting any infestations. And that's due to On infested islands, a lot of that treatment will be the responsibility of the landowner or that group. While on non-infested islands, we encourage that reporting because we want to be able to confirm, and oftentimes there are resources for that treatment. Okay, perfect. And then I'm going to pass it on to Elizabeth. She's also going to just show you a couple more of those stakeholder groups.
Well, hello, Arisa. So the next group that we wanted to highlight for you are retailers. So retailers play a vital role in preventing the spread of CRB by ensuring products like bagged soils. These are the high-risk products we've been talking about: bagged soils, compost, and mulch, as well as potted plants are pest-free. Educating customers adds another layer of defense. So for these groups, when we were talking about retailers, we're really talking about the point of sale for many of these groups, but there is a whole bunch of overlap with nurseries, while nurseries are also farmers of plants. So some of the messaging and actions for nurseries would also be found under the farmers. So some of the things I wanted to point out on the retailer messaging is that as a point of sale, they can potentially be a major point of distribution for potentially infested products to locations all around the island. So a lot of the focus of what we had was for reducing that risk. So reducing the risk of some of these high-risk materials or those plants from being infested on the site of the store, as well as steps that can be done to reduce the risk of so reducing the risk of them becoming infested and trying to ensure that they are not being sold as infested goods and going out to the larger, to other places on the islands. And one of the key things with these groups is that by having some amount of training and education, or also helping support educated consumers through signage at those like stacks of bags and at the trees, we get more people looking at all of those to potentially see any infested goods before they're sold and going out throughout the islands. Some of these stores, like the big box stores, they have super high volumes of these bags going out. I mean, we're talking 2,000 plus a week. So we really need for consumers to be informed also so that they know what to look for. And you can kind of see on this page, so CRB can actually chew into some of those plastic bags to get at that really high-risk breeding materials. They chew right into the bag. And so we really want people to be looking for the signs of that bag damage with the stippling to let the retailers know so that actions can be taken so that they are not then distributed throughout the state. And then finally, we wanted to talk a little bit about cultural practitioners and the special role that they play. So from fruit sovereignty to unique coconut varieties, weaving materials, and lo'olu palms for hale building, CRB endangers the materials and knowledge woven into Hawaiian culture. Sacred royal groves like Kupa, Iwa, on Molokai, and Wailuanui Ho'ano on Kauai could be lost. So we really want to be able to support cultural practitioners to be able to protect those sacred spaces, as well as continue to be able to use those materials that are integral to their practices. So you notice on this one, there are a couple of unique things that cultural practitioners encounter, and somewhat dealing with how these materials are gathered and stored for making things. So we really want to point out to practitioners so they can really think about how they are collecting. So you don't want to be collecting and moving infested materials, how they're storing these materials. You don't want them to become infested while you're storing them. And so we do provide some messages on how to do that in a more safe way, as well as for carvers, like say pahu drum, something as simple as being able to ensure that your carving materials are kept up off the ground or inside can really reduce the risks of those materials becoming infested, and also reducing its ability to be able to use for the intended purpose. On non-infested islands, and this is true for infested islands, but even more so for non-infested islands, there is an added element of protecting some of these culturally important areas, significant groves, like some of the sacred groves, or even significant trees. And so it is really up to those people that have a relationship with that space and that are practitioners with those materials to malama those spaces. And this may involve taking steps for early detection, doing a lot of kilo or deep observation of these trees to look for any signs of infestation, or even supporting the use of early detection tools and surveys to be able to protect those individual trees from being damaged by CRB. So we're going to go into now just a few of the really common questions that we've heard, and we're really hoping to have time in this space to be able to hear some of your questions that are the burning questions in your community, or what, if you're working with people in the community, what they are asking or concerned about. But by far, one of the questions we get the most about, and it's probably because they're pretty obvious, is about CRB traps. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about how they work and some of the common maybe misconceptions or questions that we get asked. So the question that we usually get asked is, are CRB traps just going to attract CRB to my property? So first, let me start with how these work, in case you haven't seen them. These traps, these black traps right here, they're about 3 foot tall black panel traps that have a little pheromone in the middle that can attract the CRB adults. The CRB adults fly at night. They're mostly active at night. So when they are investigating that pheromone that they smell, they will run into the black panel trap, fall into this little cup in the bottom. They cannot fly out. Now, one of the first misconceptions, or maybe beetle traps, there are a lot of beetle traps out there that will kill the beetles, and this certainly traps the beetles. Unfortunately, these CRB traps are not an effective means of control here in Hawaii. Instead, they are primarily used as a means of detection of CRB movement and new populations. So that pheromone lure that's in the middle of that trap, it lasts around 3 months and will attract CRB from about 5 to 50 feet away, depending on wind conditions. And this was tested as on Oahu, as they were trying to figure out, how do we place these traps? How are we going to use them? So CRB are actually kind of lazy. Most of their movement, as mentioned, is really by humans moving them around, often when they're eggs or larvae in that breeding material. But they're really trying to stay pretty close to the places they breed and feed. So if you look at this bottom right, they've done tests about what is attractive to those CRB adults. And really, the thing that they find the most attractive are going to be those palms and the different trees that they love to eat, those palm species. Then followed by that breeding location, that green waste, that compost pile. So this was actually a study done of green waste. And those are really what the CRB are attracted to. And they actually found that green waste was 26 times more attractive than the trap lure in field comparisons. So you may ask, okay, why would you be using these things then? They really don't work as well. They're going to be going to these palms anyway. But they do play a really important role in early detection here in the state, especially outside of Oahu, where we're really working to find CRB early and eradicate them from our islands. So the other way that you can detect, besides the CRB traps, that you can detect an infestation is looking for visible palm damage and manually searching through breeding materials. The downfall of that, and that's where you can see a tree right here that has several different spots with CRB damage. It is pretty visible. And there are some other things that can kind of look like that. But if you saw this out on the landscape, you'd be like, wow, that looks like CRB damage with those V-shaped 45-degree angle cuts. What you have to realize is that that adult CRB is not eating on the palm as we see it. It is actually going into that juicy crown of the palm right around here and chewing into it there, where it creates a hole, chews into that growing tip. And we actually see that damage as that palm frond grows out. It can actually take months for that palm frond to grow out, and even longer. The thing that we look for when we're trying to determine if it's CRB or something else like a rat damaging a tree is a borehole right here. That borehole can take even longer to be visible and is often obscured by other parts of the palm tree, as well as many palms are tall. It is really incredibly difficult to get an up close look without other tools to see if there is that borehole. Once again, the other alternative is looking for larvae in those breeding materials. So that would be manual searches of often large green waste and compost piles that we encourage people to do every 4 months. But that really requires individuals to manually search through these piles. And 4 months is enough time for there to be a CRB breeding infestation growth. And we really want to find these infestations way faster than that so we can take actions to prevent that spread. So I have a couple of examples of how that's worked here in Hawaii. So on Kauai, the first detection of CRB was on May 31st, so the end of May in 2023. And that was actually at a set of traps found at Lihue Airport at the port of entry. And these traps have actually been, and we have traps at most of our airports across the state. They've been there for many years as an added layer of protection at our ports of entry for several different target species, CRB being one. So these traps at Lihue Airport are actually checked by the Kauai Invasive Species Committee regularly. So they've been there for years. And on that day in May, Ray from KISC actually found a live CRB in that trap. So almost immediately, partners gathered together and started taking actions to try to figure out where that CRB came from. Did it come from the airport? Was it in goods that came in through the port? So additional traps were placed around the island at high-risk potential breeding sites, such as green waste and compost facilities. Immediately after this. And I want to point down, so this star is kind of covering up some of the other traps, but that's Lihue and the airport, and traps were placed all around the island. And almost immediately, they started finding CRB adults in traps throughout the island. So that really indicates that that beetle that was found in Lihue, that was not the first beetle to come onto the island. So all of those traps around the airport, they weren't attracting the CRB from somewhere to all of a sudden come onto the island there at the airport. CRB had most likely come through another means to another place on the island and started breeding, maybe even in multiple breeding locations before that first CRB was detected. So the Lihue Airport, all of those traps on that island were a secondary location. And it was the reason it would have taken even longer for us to find those breeding sites if we did not have the tool of these early detection traps to use. And just really quickly, another example from what just happened on Hawaii Island. Back in October, 6 larvae were found in a decaying palm tree by a resident in Waikoloa Village. So traps, so this is just a little corner of Big Island. Here is Waikoloa. So after that larva was found, there was same thing. People were coming in to do tree surveys all around. Traps were placed not only around that detection site, that's where you see all those red triangles right there, but as well as at other high-risk potential breeding locations, like a green waste facility for that area. And it actually took just about 6 months. But the very first adult CRB detection on Big Island was found at that green waste facility by one of those camera traps. And a camera trap is similar to the other traps we were just showing you. It just has a cell phone connected camera in there so that there can be a remote monitoring of those traps. So once again, the CRB that was found there, they were not just sticking around where the traps were. They were actually getting moved to a location that we know is a high-risk location, but that perhaps might have been missed if it was within that time frame where people might manually check that those materials for larvae or eggs, which are nearly impossible to find. That's kind of a needle in a haystack situation. They were instead, we were able to find out that, yes, there are CRB adults, they're here, and it was that camera trap that found them, not that they were getting kept just in this location because of the overwhelming attraction of these CRB early detection traps in Waikoloa Village. And I just wanted to give a quick shout out to, once again, as CRB has spread across the state, the Island Invasive Species Committees outside of Oahu have initiated a community trapping detection network. So as this pest spreads, we do not have CRB teams just waiting on each island to be able to jump into action when CRB is detected. So we have these, we really do rely on partnering with a whole bunch of people in the community to be able to be our eyes, or in this case, to sponsor CRB traps to help us cover the area that we need to be able to determine where these CRB are on these islands. So for community members, especially in high-risk areas, as well as some conservation partners, they can get one of these traps from one of these Island Invasive Species Committees, and they take responsibility for them. They check them, they maintain them, keep them safe. Often they'll have a QR code that they can scan and then enter the data when they check them weekly. So it's really important to know, okay, there are no CRB being detected in these areas. That's all super important data. So they put all these different islands, all these different people, put out these traps, enter in the information. The ISCs then can share that information with the CRB response, who then collates it and aggregates it, and then can share it amongst all the partners that are doing this management and mitigation and early detection work. So this Kokua for Coconuts, that is actually the Maui Invasive Species Committee program, what they've called it, but I just wanted to give that a shout out. And now Arisa will talk a little bit about some of the barriers to CRB eradication on Oahu.
Yep, so I'll keep this one pretty brief so we can have some time for questions at the end. But one question that we often get asked is if there is a chance for eradication on other islands, and why wasn't eradication successful on Oahu, and why have we shifted out of eradication? So one thing that I wanted to point out is that early on, there were many barriers to eradication. So some of those included limited tools to identify and treat breeding sites. There are also no quarantines or regulation to restrict movement. And then palm treatments were only made available more recently. So if you look at this timeline to the right, you'll see where some of those barriers were addressed. So from 2013, in those following years, we saw CRB spread. And then in 2019 was when we were able to get a K9 team trained to help with identification of breeding sites. So prior to that, it was all manual search of breeding sites and trying to find breeding sites based on trap finds. So 2019, we got the K9s, which helped to more efficiently find breeding sites. And then in 2020 was when we first started to use tree treatments, so palm treatments, such as tree injections of imidacloprid and acephate. In 2021 was when we had some treatments for infested breeding material. So 2021, we started using a vacuum steam unit to help and treat that material. And then in 2022, so just a couple of years ago, was when we began to use fumigation for infested material, which proved to be very effective. And then also was when the first regulation regarding movement of CRB material was put into place. So that was put into place through the HGOA interim rule. So if you want to learn more, I think it kind of cut off at the bottom there, but I'm not going to go too in depth on the different tools and stuff for CRB, but there is a webinar next week as part of Hawaii Invasive Species Awareness Month, where some of the researchers from UH are going to talk about the different tools and technologies that are being used for combating CRB in Hawaii.
Okay, mahalo. And I just want to, before we dive into the questions, I understand there's a lot. I have not been following it quite yet in the chat. We did really want to. So we had really intended, since this was a CTAHR presentation, we've kind of been thinking with extension agents in mind, which I noticed from the poll some of you are. But for all of you, we really do want to tell you that we had this collaborative effort to make this plan and to come up with these priorities. But it is a collaborative effort to get this information out and to also contribute to improving these products that we're making. So we really wanted to ask that everybody does regular reporting and monitoring for CRB sightings. And in this instance, we mentioned the CTAHR properties. Please, if you are communicating or in a community group, use key messages from the plan to, to work with your community and tell us how it's working for you so that we can continue to improve this plan. And lastly, we are probably going to be kicking off another process that kind of goes hand in hand with this, which was coming up with response plans or BMPs, best management practices, for each of these stakeholder groups. And so we would really like to recruit collaborators that are extension agents, other people that are doing this work, to help us take this information. A lot of it's out there, but to take it and put it into some concise guides to be able to share with these stakeholder groups. And with that, mahalo. And Roshan or Arisa, I think you can help us with addressing some of these questions, which I'm